If someone dedicate 4 decades of his life for a profession, it is a remarkable thing. A journalist with 40 years of experience, we can say he is a treasure for a country or a region or for the whole world. Today our guest is such an important person, Raj Chengappa, well known journalist. Not only he is not famous only in India, but in Sri Lanka and in our region and throughout the world. Sir, welcome to Rupavahini.
Thanks, Prasad.
Yes.
Honor to be on your show.
Yes, Mr. Chengappa is an award-winning journalist for over 40 years standing, and he is currently the group editorial director of the India Today group and the editor India Today magazine. So, today he is with us to discuss many things, especially about the upcoming elections and the experience of Indian election, and at the same time Lanka developments. But first, before moving to that topic, the heavy topics, first I would like to, Mr. Chengappa is a very good storyteller. He has lot of stories because Mr. Chengappa and Sri Lanka has very close links. So, he is first, definitely our viewers, they will like to listen these stories. So, he is going to tell us what are the trends and what are the very close moments and links with him and our country. So,
it's a long history, but to cut a long story short, 1982 was when I first began to really get interested in Sri Lanka. I was a correspondent in South. I was based in Bangalore and I got this phone call. Those days you didn't have cell phones, you just had those old trunk calls that used to come, or you had a teleprinter. This was the old days of journalism, and you wrote on a typewriter. So I got this call to say that there's been a shootout in Madras, could you go down, rush and go down. 2 people have been arrested, and the word those days was that the Tamil boys had been arrested. Tamil boys they were called. So I landed up over there, and of course the 2 names became famous, infamous, or whatever you'd like to call it. At that time they were part of the whole Tamil Tigers, as they were called. And one was the most famous of them all, V. Prabhakaran.
Velupillai Prabhakaran.
The other? And the other was Uma Maheshwaran, who was, I think, at that time in charge of plot. LTT
was in 80s?
This 82, exactly 82. Okay. So they got arrested in Madras, and I went there. I didn't know too much about this. I don't think the world knew also, and it was just developing at that time. And I was asked to report it. So I stood up, I wanted to see who they were, and I wanted to photograph them. We carried our own photographs, own cameras those days, and I stood up at a building at the Egmore one of the courts in Madras, at a certain height, and when they came, both of them were in handcuffs. Prabhakaran was in handcuffs, and Uma Maheshwaran, no, his compatriot, Uma Maheshwaran, was elsewhere in the hospital or whatever it was. And when I photographed him, he looked up. And he saw me, and when he saw me, he was so angry. I can still remember his eyes. They were really ferocious. And I almost dropped my camera because I didn't, understand. We were doing our job. Subsequently, when I took the photograph, a lot of the people, and there was also Sri Lankan intelligence at that time, were coming and saying, please give us the photograph. He has never been photographed, or they said, I don't know, but had not been photographed much, except when he was 8, 10, or 12, 15. They don't have a recent photograph of him. I told them, you can see it the next issue in the magazine of India Today, and we did carry that photograph. So there began my association with the entire Sri Lankan civil war, if you'd like to call it. I got busy with other reports because I was a young reporter, so I wanted to learn a lot more about India. So I focused a lot. I came back after the IPKF and everything else. This was when Rajiv Gandhi was assassinated, and the trial was going on again in Madras. There was a special court that was there, and I had to listen. The officer in charge, I knew before, so he said, come by. He was the person in charge of the entire investigation, Mr. V. Karthikeyan, a very famous police officer, became after that Central Bureau CBI chief and some of the key police organizations. And so I listened to all the tapes of the entire assassination plot, what were all the LTT doing, what were the phone calls, what was the evidence, how was Prabhakaran involved in it, and that was the next big episode. Then I came back. I mean, off and on we would be there. In 2000 I flew back, and that was the time that Chandrika Kumaratunga, I think, was president, and she had launched these various assaults against the LTT, Riveressa, Operation this and that, and she had initially seemed to have success. But in 2000, Prabhakaran struck back, I think with Operation Unceasing Waves or something to that effect, and captured certain amount of towns over there,
Elephant Pass.
Elephant Pass and all that. So that was a significant change. So we called it the Return of the Tigers. We did a cover story on that. And you know, that time I didn't get to meet Prabhakaran, but strangely enough, he had a press conference in Kilonichi or wherever.
Yeah, that was in the peace period.
Peace period, 2002. I think Ranil Wickremesinghe was the Prime Minister, or
at that time Prime Minister.
If I'm, you know, please forgive me if I'm getting the dates wrong and all this. It's many years back, right? 20 years ago. And so we went to the forest where he was there. It was what we call in India Z-type security. It was full of guards around him, and he virtually was running the place out there. You know, once you crossed a certain point, he was in charge. His security people took charge, and there are many journalists. I was not the only one. Except I remember that when I asked him a question. So, you know, he of course had, you had seen much later put on weight. When you see the early photographs, 82 is thin, is slim, with hair like that. But he turned and stopped and looked at me in a way that he seemed to recognize that I must have put that, or whatever it was. I mean, maybe that was my imagination. But that was the time I really saw him in person. He's, you know, asked him a question. And of course, as things happened, I came back. I think Mahinda Rajapaksa had become the president after that, and the war was on. And so I'd interviewed Mahinda Rajapaksa, and I'm sorry if I'm using first names, Mr. Mahinda Rajapaksa, no disrespect. He's President Rajapaksa at that time. And I told him that there was an issue in terms of the perception the world had, and that you were not allowing journalists to go to the front. So he said, "Are you willing to go?" I said, "Sure." So the next day I flew down through sort of helicopter style. We had to fly at treetops because they were very worried that you know, the LTTs people would whoever the forces were there would hit them. So the lower you flew, and the speed that you went, they couldn't hit you with missiles. So it was the first experience of mine going on treetop to the thing, and you only see that in movies, in Vietnam style. Those who have done this will say this is normal, but we didn't land in any place. The helicopter would hover and we would get off at a field, and so we went to the front. I interviewed all the troops over there, and when I was coming back, and that's when I realized the consequences of war. I had interviewed some of the people up front, and these were Sri Lankan army people. And when I came back, we lifted off again from a field, took off, and that pilot said we have to go back. And about 3 or 4 of the people that I had interviewed actually had stepped into a landmine soon after. And they were all injured very badly. So they had to fly them to the hospital. I think it was Anuradhapura or wherever it was there. So there was very little seat, and I was very embarrassed because they had to take me out also. I was also, I was not supposed to be in these areas, right? And so they were there, and then you realize the consequences of war. They were young boys, young thing. Whichever side, it doesn't matter, but war is something we need to avoid. And that's when it strikes you that these are not, there are better ways to settle disputes than our young people dying so much. So that was the time. And then finally, to end this is a bit of a long explanation on what happened, is I came back. I guess everything needs a closure. Whatever you start in life, you look back philosophically, there's a closure that is happening. And in May 2009, I got a call to say that Prabhakaran was killed. And I immediately caught a flight to come there. Of course, it was in the jungles, so I was not able to go to the front. But I remember interviewing Mahinda Rajapaksa, the president at that time, Gotabaya was the defense secretary, and also the General Sarath Fonseca. So listen to what it is, and we talked of what after of this. That was, I thought, in some senses, what began, which me photographing Prabhakaran at a very, very young age, and him, seeing what we put on the cover of India Today of his photographs of him being killed was a kind of a closure of some sorts. Sri Lanka, then I moved on as editor-in-chief of the Tribune, so I really didn't focus, but kept track of Sri Lanka, especially during this troubled period that you had in 2022. And so the link, somehow there has been a bond, and this is 15 years later, after I came during that terrible time, and the victory that the Sri Lankan army had achieved, saw that as well after seeing the war, seeing that, and the changes that have happened since then. And now, of course, I think you're at another turning point.
Yes. Now, after 15 years, you are back in Sri Lanka. So, Sri Lanka also went, as you said, went through various challenges, especially the crisis we faced 2 years ago. And now you are here. How do you feel Sri Lanka? How do you feel Sri Lanka?
Strangely enough, Prasad, one of the things when I came here is I couldn't recognize Colombo. It's so built up, right? It was a very beautiful, picturesque town. But if you stand in front of Golface, you can see the tall buildings across. So one of the things I did this time was, when I'd come in 2000, I sat on the cannon that is there and took a photograph. So this time I again sat to show the transition that is there on that one. But I think, as I was mentioning, I think you're at the country is at a very critical turning point, and the world is watching. We saw what happened in 2022. We saw the Aragallia movement. We saw the upsurge that happened. We saw the president of the country resign. We saw the prime minister of the country resign. We saw Mr. Ranil Wickremesinghe turn president, and a very difficult period. You had high inflation. Food was scarce, petrol was scarce, fertilizer. You couldn't imagine that Sri Lanka, that looked so prosperous, that had the best education if you looked across, 100% literacy, was one of the most, and we thought peace had come back because, the closure had happened in May 2010, and suddenly, a decade later, to be in the kind of economic mess was stunning. So I think that period is still a very tough period. President Ranil Wickremesinghe has weathered the storm in terms of bringing things back to normal. So when I went to the beach this time, there were no crowds. As you saw when the Aragallia was there, if you saw the photos in Golface where the heart of the movement was, and the president's house being occupied. Today it's all tourists and enjoying themselves. And I wish Sri Lanka well in this. So I think the decision that will happen now, of course, there are many good candidates. Sri Lanka is a great democracy. There's a lot of competition going on that's very healthy. And people have a way of, a more democratic way of electing their government and who should be ruling Sri Lanka. And I think, having learned from Bangladesh, having seen what has happened, it's very important that there are outlets for anybody to express their opinion. And if you get an elected government, I think that is the way to diffuse a lot of the crisis.
Yes, you mentioned various important points. And now, you mentioned about the crisis as well. And during the crisis, India also supported Sri Lanka in a great way to come out of this mess. So, now, what's your opinion on Indo-Lanka bondage, Indo-Lanka relations? And we have, for a long period, we have a very close relationship. And what will happen to this relationship in the future? Because, when we talk about the region, there are various aspects. So, according to your view, what will happen to Sri Lanka in their relationship?
I think there are far better people to give you a good analysis of it. I must be very frank. Secondly, let me make it clear that while I covered this LTT and some of the issues, there were far more brilliant journalists who came and did outstanding work, both from Lanka, from India. So just because I had a little story to tell, I wasn't the prime person, right? Yeah. There were a lot of other people doing outstanding jobs. Yes. I was episodical. So let's be very clear. I'm not trying to take any credit. Yeah. There's nothing. It just happened. You asked me the story, so I'm telling you. I'm not, this thing. Same thing, I think, when you look at, India-Lanka relations, we have seen it go up and down constantly. There has been a yo-yo effect. It's sometimes up, sometimes down. And I think that needs to end, because the distrust that was there, the main irritant that was there was the entire civil war that was going on, and whose side was on whose side. But with that out of the way, I think we can, of course, there are issues that need to be sorted out. I'm not saying that is over, right? Countries take long to heal their wounds. It doesn't happen overnight. You cannot think, just like if you look at your own lives, any death in the family doesn't go over, right? There is a void. That void needs to be filled. Something has to happen. As I keep calling, a closure has to happen in some ways for people to move forward. Otherwise, we will always go back in your life to something in the past. And that's human tendency. So I think what we require from both the countries, and that's what has happened. I think a very good thing happened during the unfortunate economic collapse, that India came with timely assistance. And whoever I spoke to here, I'm not talking of just the Indian High Commission, but others acknowledged that India was, had done a good thing. And secondly, India's support in terms of economic support, whether it was investing in very major projects across Sri Lanka. Our cultures are not too different, right? You might wear your sari in a different way, but we all wear saris, right?
That's the good.
And some of the language that is the origin of those words, you can somehow almost without even knowing the language know that what it means, because there's some similarity in one of the Indian languages that's there. So I think the cultural bonds are very strong. The economic bonds need to be made stronger. The political bonds in terms of the, not in terms of government. I think these relations should be immune to governmental changes. That one regime comes and they say, no, this is not, we shouldn't encourage or have better relations with India. And the other comes and says, no, we should have better. I think that has to go. I think there must be an element of continuity in the way we do things with Sri Lanka. And I think the larger goal, the big message that is coming from, say, Bangladesh, what happened in Sri Lanka earlier, what happened in Pakistan,
Maldives.
The Maldives, Maldives, I mean, they didn't have an uprising, but certainly there was a yo-yo. What I'm saying is that the young are impatient. They're aspirational. They want good governance. They want jobs. They want good living. They don't want to be on doles. We saw that in India with the elections. There was a message to the government there that, you have to govern, and it doesn't mean that you will get everything all the time. We need to see that happening. So I think the elections here will give that message over here as well. Every government now has to start thinking, how much better can I perform? Even if you performed well in the past, the people say, yeah, we rewarded you by giving you the 5 years or 10 years or whatever in power, but now you need to do another 5 years. So you have to demonstrate that you could do that well. So I think the large lesson that is coming from South Asia is that we have a demographic bulge. When we say demographic bulge, to make it simple, the percentage of population between 15 and 35 in these countries, including India and Sri Lanka and all these places, is very, very high. And if you do not provide jobs for these people, after all, my son, your children, anybody else, fine, we struggled our way through and somehow did some things. But they are looking out for opportunities. If they don't find it, as we've seen in Sri Lanka, a lot go abroad. As we've seen in India and other places, they will be doing what we call disguised employment. You think they're employed, but they're not fully employed. And then you have the whole question of skill. So today's thing means that the entire South Asia must come together, and Sri Lanka is a very important part of that, to come together to see how we can firstly build greater geographical economic linkages, because it's much cheaper to buy something from India than to import it, say, from Brazil. Coffee from India is cheaper than you trying to buy from Brazil, or rice from India can go to Pakistan rather than, some convoluted route from other sides through the black market or whatever it is. So I think just like Europe, there was a phase when Europe got together and did the common market. We need to move as things, and I believe that India is the larger country in the region, only by size. I think every country is important. No one is small, no one is in this one.
Yes.
But just by the market size and everything, we should offer more concessions to our neighbors so that we integrate better, because the stability of a nation like Sri Lanka helps India considerably in other ways. So we would not like Sri Lanka to have an economic collapse. It is not good news for anyone. So I think we are invested, or we should be invested. I'm not speaking on behalf of the government. I'm speaking as a citizen,
as a journalist,
as a journalist, in some extent, more my own personal opinion. having watched the area, that and I've been through the various processes of SAARC, of the South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation. Now we have BIMSTEC, the Economic and Technical Cooperation, as we call BIMSTEC, is which Sri Lanka is an integral part. Somewhere we need to start working towards that. I don't think the young want to get. They really want, like all of us, to have a house, to have a job, to have get married, to have children, and to be secure. That is, I think, the South Asian dream. South Asian dream is not to fight with each other, not to kill each other, not to be at war with each other. I think we have to understand that.
That was a great message to end our now 30 minutes passed.
Oh, I didn't realize. You're a good interviewer.
You were a good storyteller because, and you gave, a whole lot of ideas to think and a lot of insightful thoughts.
That's kind of you.
And, it was one of the greatest moments we have because having a journalist to share experience and his experience are vast and very useful for a country like Sri Lanka.
That's
so thank you for sharing your
it's my honor. It's the other way around. Rupavahini is such a famous institution. Radio Ceylon is such a famous. We all grew up listening to it. And for me, it's a great honor and privilege. And Prasad, you've always been a wonderful interviewer. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. And thank you for being with us.